How's it going, everybody? Svenddiesel here. We're going to be tying up a pheasant tail nymph. This is, be more specific, a pheasant tail nymph with a bead, or a bead head pheasant tail nymph. We're going to be using an Umpqua hook, a TMC 3761 in a size 14. I typically fish these in 14 to 18s. We're going to be putting a brass bead. This is a 3.2 millimeter or 1/8 of an inch in gold. We're also going to be using some pheasant tail fibers. This is a natural feather color, and it comes 2 to a pack, and you can see there's plenty of fibers on here to make plenty of flies. So next we're going to be using some UTC wire. This is size medium in gold, and also we're going to be tying in one of my favorite materials, peacock. This is a peacock herl. We're going to be using about a 1/4 to 1/2 of an inch maybe of 2 fibers, so we got plenty here. Let's go ahead and get started. First, let's get our hook and our bead. We're going to put the bead onto the hook, and the way you do that is simply hold it in your hand and place the small side. There's 2 different hole sides on this bead. We want the smaller hole going into the hook point, and sometimes it may be a little bit difficult to get this properly aligned. They do make tools for this, but I found that it's just one of those things. You got to roll the bead and get it positioned onto that hook point, and then once it's on, if it struggles to go around that bend, just kind of use your fingernail. We'll make sure that's secure with a little bit of the ping test, making sure that it doesn't move. And we're going to start with this is a wax thread and a 12/0, and we're going to need a red Sharpie. I usually tie in white, and I'll just color the head red. And so let's go ahead and get started here with some nice wraps right here behind the hook eye, and I'm going to leave about a distance of a hook eye, and then I will wrap my thread, including the tag end, around that brass bead, trying to keep that thread that goes over the brass bead on top so that it won't be visible. And we'll go ahead and work back to the bend of the hook and trim out our tag end. Make sure that that bead is secure and not wanting to move, and then we'll go ahead and start with our first material, which is the wire. This is a little trick I do on most of my pheasant tail nymphs. I don't start with tying in the pheasant tail fibers. I start with the wire, and that helps with a couple reasons. The first is, one, I secure it on the top of the shank as shown, and then I kind of work it over to the side. This will help with the taper, and also with that first wrap being on the side. It's going to come around real nice and trap those tail fibers. Now, the reason I tie in the wire first and rather than the pheasant tail fibers is I found it really helps with, one, also adding to the taper of the fly, and secondly, it helps with that first wrap. So it's a double over. And so we'll go ahead and grab 5 to 6 fibers, trying to keep those tips aligned the best as possible. And I'll measure about the hook shank in length, and then I'll pinch those with my other hand, and I'll go ahead and tie those in on the top of the hook shank, working my way up to that bead. Not quite to the bead. I'm leaving a little bit of a gap there, and I'll check the length. Those look a little long. So let's go ahead and just pull them slightly to the length that you want, being careful not to tear them, and that looks perfect. Let's make sure they're on the top of the shank, and we will wrap this back over itself again, ending almost where our wire is coming out the side, and then I'll go ahead and clean that up and end with my thread right there behind the bead. And you can see we're just going to grab these in a clump, kind of fan out that first wrap, and then begin to palmer this around. The best of your ability, keeping them all together, and then we're going to build up a taper here by doing kind of an extra wrap in here, and then I will end with my tag end here up on the top of the shank with 2 wraps. And then what we're going to do is use this for our wing casing, and so I'll do about 2 or 3 wraps, but I want to kind of keep that out of my way. We're not going to wrap back over. And so just be very careful, and let's counter rib, meaning wrap the opposite direction we did our pheasant tail fibers there on the body, and we're going to counter wrap that with the wire. And so I'm just going to bring that first wrap right there. You can see by tying it in on the side, and also before, that first wrap is the beginning of our taper. And so you're not going to have a big step down in the body there, and it also helps secure those fibers on the top of the shank, and you can manipulate that a little bit better by doing it with the wire rather than the thread. And then I'll just wrap up to the tie-off point here right behind the bead. You can see that by placing this bead we're losing a little bit of our body, but I found that it helps with the weight, and 2, it adds a little shiny object that fish kind of really like. And so we'll go ahead and tie in that wire by doing some wraps behind and in front, and then we'll snip it out with some flush cutters, and then kind of make sure that it's not exposed. Check our tail, and we're golden. and then I'll go ahead and wrap this pheasant tail back. So we've got about an eye length of thread here, and these pheasant tail tag ends we want to kind of splay out, not be necessarily in a huge clump, but we're going to use that to wrap back over to form our wing case. So we are ready to proceed with the next portion and tie-in material, and that is the peacock herl. Now in this pack you're going to find some, you want to look for the ones that have this really fuzziness to it. Some of them do or do not have that. If they don't have it, you can use it for other things, but for this we want that fiber-esque material to really just kind of shine and glisten and add the wonderful material that peacock has, many properties of attracting fish. So we'll tie that in and go ahead and cut out our tag ends there, and I want to get about 4 wraps of this peacock herl here. And so I'll start right out there at the back, and we'll do a full wrap, and then we'll kind of start wrapping over our wraps we just did, and then we'll use the bead to kind of slide 1 extra wrap in, and then we'll go ahead and secure it behind the bead with a wrap behind and a few wraps in front. The wraps in front just close off that gap and really pinch that to be a closed and secured tie-off point. And then I'll use my finger and keep that thread on the top of the bead there, and then advance my thread up to the thread portion right behind the eye. And you can see we've got our pheasant tail fibers ready to go. And for the wing, for the legs on this, we're actually going to be using 3 to 4 of this same color of pheasant tail. And I always just feel like I'm wasting so much, but I want to just take these, and I'm going to pull off a new section for each one. I like having the tips come off. Some people just cut them, but you can see I do a few securing wraps, check the length. You can pull it just like we did before to get the right proper the length, and I like it to go about to the back of the body, maybe a little bit shorter sometimes. It just depends on what kind of mood I'm in. I don't know if the fish really look at that extra 32nd of an inch that I just pulled it, but you know, for me it could be a difference of having confidence in the fly or not. And I'll do the same thing. Notice how I'm kind of crisscrossing them here at the tie-in point so that they're splaying each different way, and we're using the bead to separate those at this point. But what we're going to do now is pull these pheasant tail tag ends that we've been saving, and I'm not pulling them clumped together. I'm kind of fanned them out with my thumb, and then I'll check my the legs here, and I like how it is, and I'll just use my thumb to secure that and check everything out, and that looks pretty good. We can manipulate these a little bit more when we resin this, but I'll make sure we got 2 or 3 securing wraps. I'll do some in front of this, and then we'll go ahead and trim out all these tag ends. Try to get it as close as you can without cutting the thread, and occasionally you miss one, and you can come in and just try to be careful not to cut your legs or anything like that. And you can see we are about done here, but first we're going to create a head. We're just going to grab our red Sharpie and color about a 4-inch section of this, maybe 3 inches depending on how big of a head you want. And then we'll just cover this up to clean up those little butt ends right there, using my whip finisher to just wrap around this and cover everything that's white with red. I've tied these primarily with red heads and orange. That seems to be pretty effective. I've also tried olive, black, and a few other colors, but red seems to be my confidence color. And we'll go ahead and trim off our thread now. And here's where we really can manipulate these wings. We're going to apply a little bit of a thin resin to the back of this, and I'm just going to put a little bit of a drop and just spread it out across this the fibers that we pulled over, making sure a little bit goes into the thread. And I'll let that kind of soak in for a second, and then we'll position them how we want it, and then I just take my finger and then cure it, and it's going to push those down, and they'll be exiting the fly shank there just how I want it, and that resin will help control that and keep them in place. But as soon as it gets wet, those are going to kind of flow back, even though the pheasant tail is a really stiff material. And then I come in and still do a second coat with just about 1 more drop and go ahead and cure that. And that's pretty much it. It's a relatively quick tie. I like tying these with the beads because it helps get it down faster, adds a little bit of shine. Tie it up in a bunch of different colors and sizes, and hopefully they catch some fish.